what's working behind us? We're in an area of a ghost town called Quneitra. Means the city was once the capital of the region pre-67, and it was conquered by Israel during the Six-Day War, and then was given back to Syria on May 74 as part of the agreements of disengagement we had after the Yom Kippur. The Syrians were obligated of rebuilding the city, something that, as you can see, was never done. And since then, it used them mostly for propaganda against Israel, showing the destruction we supposedly made during the Six-Day War. In 76, they built the new Quneitra, which we saw there from the closed area over the fence. The mosque that we saw, and there were new houses. So that's the new Quneitra, which practically is also abandoned, pretty much like the old one now, as a result of the Syrian civil war taking place in the past 12 years, since March 2011. In terms of that specific structure there, so that was the former headquarters of the Syrian army. Wow. And today it's using the Israeli army, but that's new. And we used to come there, and it was kind of a tourist attraction. So today, no tourists.
Except us.
Kind of. I don't know if they will buy it that you're a tourist.
Yeah.
But just for understanding, on the last day of the Six-Day War, 10 of June 67, that was Saturday afternoon, there was an Israeli unit called Sabar that got there to the office of Ahmad el-Miri, was the head of the Syrian forces in the Golan Heights, and found a map. The title of the map was Janub al-Sariya, and the southern part of Syria. And then below it said Amaliyat al-Nasr, the plan or the operation of the victory. And on the map you can see the Upper Galilee, Mount Carmel, and Caesarea. Okay? So what we call northern Israel, that's what they call southern Syria. We call it the Six-Day War. They won't call it like that. Okay? It's called Harb Khazairan, which is the War of June, or Naksa even, which is even worse. That's a disaster. So eventually it was disaster for them, but for us, we opened by a preemptive attack in 67, something that didn't happen not in 1973 or on October 7th. Israel have no option to absorb an attack. We have no buffer zones. You see it here. That's the Syrian army over there with Hezbollah and the other good guys, our new neighbors from the past 12 years. And we'll talk about them. And these are the farmers are right here. And soon we're going to start the cherry season. In about 3 weeks, the blossom will begin. In the end of May, you're going to see here 300 workers coming to pick cherries. And then the apples start 2 months after. It will turn very busy here. So, and normally you won't see so many forces being in the area. There's no buffer. And we saw that as a result of that, we lost 1,200 civilians in that morning of October 7th. And 240 of them were kidnapped. Wow. So this is the scenario that today we have to prepare ourselves for, also here on this front. Unfortunately, I think that we will better prepare on this front than on the front there. But first of all, let's just understand our location, just to pinch ourselves on the map. This is a map of Israel. We're standing right here, okay? In the northeast part of the country. This is the Golan Heights. So that's northeast Syria. If you want to see the map of Syria, so the blue here, that's the Israeli Golan. You can also see the size in terms of Syria, because the rest of the colors, that's Syria today. It's hard to call it a state, because there's not much left there. Since the war in Syria began on March 2011, those are the estimations, that million people got killed.
Whoa.
There are many Syrians today that come in and say, they kind of find it as unbelievable, the fact that the whole world now facing Gaza, and the fact that probably more than 20,000 Palestinians got killed as a result of that attack of Hamas and the Israeli response. And only in Syria, there were at least 200,000 Palestinians got killed by the Syrian regime. No one talked about it. Million people, you can expect that the Syrians naturally will support the Palestinians. But they come in and say, no way. You done nothing, the war done nothing, when so many of us, Palestinians and others, got killed in Syria. And here everyone trying to stop Israel, even after that massacre that Israel. So you can see that most of Syria controlled by the Syrian regime today. Means it's about 70%. But also in this area, means we're talking about 6.6 million being displaced. They are not in their original communities. 6.8 million refugees.
Thank you.
Left Syria to all kinds of different places, most of them in the Middle East, not necessarily Europe. We're talking about 90% of the population of Syria live under poverty line, and pretty much the same percentage need humanitarian aid. There's not much of a state there. So even this pink area that's supposedly controlled by the Syrian regime have many different units inside, militias that affiliated with Iran, using the vacuum that created there. For the Iranians, the best thing that happened is the fact that millions Syrians got killed, and the rest need every dollar that they can get, even if those are Persian Shiites that give it to the Arab Sunnis. We see here this yellow area. These are Kurds that have national political ambitions and want to have their own state one day. It's called Rojava, Western Kurdistan. We have the green here, that's Turkey, coming from the own entrance, mostly in order to prevent from the Kurds of Syria to support the Kurds in Turkey. There are 2.5 million in Syria, but there are 20 million in Turkey, which is a quarter of the population there. And we have the rebels area being in Idlib with 3 million Muslim Sunnis living in. And part of them are very radicals, part of them are more moderate, freedom fighter style. But you're going to find their Al-Qaeda, you're going to find their ISIS, not necessarily good guys. They want to have a different Syria. In terms of this war, there's something in the Islam, and I think that in this case, we need kind of disconnect ourselves for several moments from our rational, as Israelis, as Americans, kind of Western rational, and trying to get into the thoughts of the guys in the Middle East. They can be good guys and they can be bad guys, but they definitely think very different than us. And they have a rational. And I saying that because in order to analyze the situation and understand why they decided to attack us on October 7, we need to understand how they think. And the situation that we experiencing now, or the situation as they analyze it on October 7, is what called in the Islam Salh al-Hudaybiyah. What it actually means. Salh, that's ceasefire. Hudaybiyah, that's a name of a town. And it talks about Muhammad that left Mecca in 622. He left Mecca because he didn't manage to preach there. And he decided to leave the whole area that was controlled by pagans and to start his hijrah, his migration, his journey from Mecca to Medina, crossing the Arabian Peninsula, crossing the desert and bring more people to become Muslims. It means to be devoted to Allah. On the way, this guy, Muhammad, turned to be a robber of different convoys. And in 624, he managed to rob a convoy of different vehicles there that managed to get gold and different spices and weapons. But that was a convoy that was controlled by a very important guy that called Abu Sufyan from Mecca. And when Abu Sufyan came back to Mecca, he said, there's a robber there in the desert that dared to attack me. And they asked him, who's the robber? And he said, his name is Muhammad. He said, okay, we're going to send an army to destroy his group. Muhammad waited for them and managed to deceive that army that was sent from Mecca and eventually defeated them. That was the point, 624. They call it Amaliyat Badr. Amaliyat, again, Operation Badr, that was the place where they were stopped. That Muhammad turned to be from a robber to be a leader. Everyone in the area heard about Muhammad that meant to stop that army. When they attacked us, Hamas, on October 7, they call it Amaliyat Badr. Means we're going to do the same as Muhammad and deceive the Israelis. Bring them to believe that we care about the wealth of our people in Gaza, about the money that we get in Gaza through Israel from Qatar. Meanwhile, we want attack from Gaza, and we're going to bring the situation in the West Bank to escalate. And instead of having 3 brigades along the Gaza border, we had 300 soldiers. Once the rest removed to the area of the West Bank. That's Amaliyat Badr. And then 4 years after, Muhammad decided that he wanted to get back. But then he saw the people of Mecca and the army, and it looked as it was stronger than his. So he decided to sign with them on an agreement in a town that called Hudaybiyah, and he committed that he won't attack them in the next 9 years, 9 months, and 9 days. People got back to their business, they trusted Muhammad and the agreement, and many of them left the city. And then 2 years after, Muhammad found an opportunity and attacked Mecca and managed to conquer the city. There's a question in the Islam. How come the prophet, the last prophet, the founder of the Islam, the Ma'asum, someone that cannot make mistakes because everything that he was doing and saying was Bismillah, in the name of Allah, violated an agreement? And then they will say, Muhammad tried to teach us that if your enemy is undefeatable, don't attack. What's the point? Make an agreement, do whatever you need in order to build your force and wait for an opportunity. I believe that our enemies around us, not only in Gaza, but all over the Middle East, fought on October 7 that we're in a situation of Salh. They found Israel as a weak country. And not all of it was cause of Israel, but also cause of US that started to lose their interest in the region. Because eventually once Iran look at the dynamic between forces in the Middle East, they see America as a significant force that's supposed to deter them. But here, America gradually started to do other things and diverted their attention to the South China Sea, to Ukraine, to internal affairs of abortions, inflation, immigration, COVID, whatever, and different things that done by America or haven't done during the past decade eventually show the Iranians and others that America turning weaker. For example, if we're trying to understand how they think, take August 2013 as an excellent example. What happened then? Assad, the president of Syria, decided to use sarin gas, nerve gas. You don't want to see someone die out of that gas, against his own people, and 1,600 Syrians got killed by the area of Damascus. Not a remote area like here in the Golan, in the central part of Syria, and practically crossed a red line of Obama once there was no response. Let's take another example, again, from their eyes. I would say July 2015. That was the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement. And in the nuclear agreement, from the concern of the Arabs in the Middle East and the Iranians, that was an agreement between the West to Iran, which allowed Iran to continue with their nuclear program and lifted the sanctions. Weakness. And then another good example was September 2019, once the Iranians used their proxies and bombed Khoris in Abqaiq in Saudi Arabia, oil refineries and fields, reduced the oil production in Saudi Arabia by 50% for 2 weeks, no response. And in addition, I can say that in the 2 years before the attack of October 7, American bases being in Syria and Iraq attacked for 83 times. 45 American soldiers got injured as a result of that. How many times US responded? 3. Which means that here Iran understood that US is busy with other things, not with the Middle East. And eventually the image that Israel built over the years as an undefeatable country, as a strong one in the Middle East, built by the capabilities of the military and by the relationship that we have with America. And those relationships got to a diplomatic crisis when Biden, over the legal reform that we had in Israel, refused to invite Netanyahu to the White House. They had to meet in the Security Council of the UN in New York, not there. That's something that the Iranians saw. The fact that we had maneuvers together with the Americans practicing by the Mediterranean Sea didn't manage to impress the Iranians. Seeing the Israeli Prime Minister working together in the White House with the American Prime Minister, that's something that impressed Iran. But it didn't happen. Parallel to that, Israel had demonstrations that brought officers that volunteer to serve in special forces as part of their reserves to stop doing that. And pilots from respectable squadrons. Which means the Iranians didn't manage to understand what's going on with the Israeli legal reform and the demonstrations and what it all is about. But they managed to understand that the army turns weaker and maybe will be destroyed as the same as the Syrian army destroyed itself. When the war in Syria began, that was the Syrian president that gave the orders to the army, to the military of Syria, shoot those protesters in the streets. The problem is that 74% of Syria then, out of 22.5 million people, were Muslim Sunnis. The rest were different minorities, of course, Shiites, Circassians, Druze, Christians, Ismailis, and Alawites that run the country. And those Alawites, like Assad the president, they celebrate Christmas, Easter, and a few of the Muslims' holidays, drink wine at the ritual ceremonies. They're not exactly Muslims. And here, an Alawite general ordered a Sunni soldier, killed another Sunni, same like you, your brother, your father, your neighbor, someone that you grew up together with in the same village. Many of them said no thanks. They defected and formed different militias of rebels. Iran believed that the same thing will happen here in Israel. And parallel to that, I can say that Iran started to get stronger. Part of it is a result of nuclear, and they now practically a latency nuclear state. Part of it is a result of the fact that Iran created rings of fire around their enemies. The main thing that's important for the Iranians is influence. Iran think in terms of the Persian Empire, controlling the land from Morocco in the west to India in the east, from North Africa in the south to Central Asia and parts of Europe in the north. Those are the terms. And the Iranians try to export their revolution even before the revolution took place, from the days of the Shah, but much more intensively since 1979. And they know how to exploit opportunities. When there was a civil war starting in Lebanon in the 70s, and the war was in between Muslims to Christians mostly, we had Iran supporting the establishment of Hezbollah, that today armed by 150,000 missiles and rockets that can reach anywhere in Israel, which is a bigger arsenal of missiles that all the NATO countries besides US have. When Iran saw an opportunity in Iraq in all three, they knew how to get there and build their Shiite militias there and control the government of Iraq, which turned to be a Shiite government instead of a Sunni. When the civil war in Syria began, Iran gradually started to bring different militias there. We saw them bringing the Fatamayun, a militia from Afghanistan, the Zanabiyun from Pakistan. We saw them bringing many Shiite militias from Iraq. Only in Iraq, there are 70 different militias. Those ones that got into Syria were the Isabah al-Hakli, Wazul-Fikar, Wafad al-Abbas, Imam al-Khalab, Hizbullah Harakat al-Nujaba, Wahashd al-Sha'abiyya. We're talking now about 45,000 of those Shiite proxies there in Syria, following the orders of Iran. Once the idea was, first of all, to protect Iran. Second, to create rings of fire around their enemies. How? If someone here in Israel will think about attacking the Iranian nuclear program, or if Iran will decide that tomorrow, this is the day that we want to destroy Israel, as they call it, whip Israel out of the map, they won't launch the missiles from Tehran to Tel Aviv, but from Damascus, from Beirut, from Gaza, from the western Iraq, from the northern Yemen. Sounds familiar? This is the situation that we're experiencing here. The thing is that once this war began on October 7, today we understand that it was a decision of Hamas. And you come in and say, wait a second. If the Iranians brought Shiite militias to Syria, means they work together with Shiites. If the Iranians working with Hezbollah in Lebanon, they work together with Shiites. Hamas, the initials in Arabic, that's the Harakat Muqawama al-Islamiyya, which means the movement for the Islamic resistance. And it's part of the Muslims Brotherhood. Muslims Brotherhood is a movement that exists, founded in Egypt in 1928, and exists in order to replace the leaders of the Arab countries all over and eventually control the world by the Islamic Caliphate. But Iran want to control the world. How it works together. How Sunnis, radical Sunnis, fundamentalistic Sunni organization, working together with Shiites in Iran. In Arabic they say, Ana ala ahi, I'm against my brother. Ana wahi ala bin ami, I'm my brother against my cousin. Ana wahi wa bin ami ala gharib, I'm my brother and my cousin against the foreigner. Israel eventually brought them to work together. And I can say that in the past year and a half, we saw that Hamas turned to be almost an organic part out of that excess of evil built by the Iranians. Maybe they couldn't trust them, but they were very active and effective part of that axis. Even though on October 7, once Hamas believed, as a result of their leaders that coordinated with the Iranians, that if they will attack and make the decision about the timing by themselves, the Iranians will support them. They're part of the Axis. Iran is the one that armed them. Iran is the one that trained the Nukhba that invaded into Israel in Iran, part of them in Syria. They will definitely support. And therefore they called that operation, when they crossed into Israel, Tufan al-Aqsa, Tufan, the flood of Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. Means that's part of the Quran, Surah Al-Ankabut, that talks about Noah and the ark and the flood of Allah, that eventually will bring all the sinners, the infidels, to die, and only the believers, the Muslims, will survive it. Means that here, Yehya Sinwar, that ordered on the attack in Gaza, was completely sure that they're going to be the first, and right after, Palestinians from the West Bank will join them, and Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Shiite militias in Syria, the Iraqis, and the Houthis in Yemen. He was completely sure, but eventually it didn't happen. Why it didn't happen? Because this is not necessarily Iran giving here all the orders. Each of the proxies, each of the organizations will have their own agenda. And Hezbollah came and said, we're willing to support, but it's going to be mostly a solidarity fire. As long as you being attacked by Israel, that responding to the massacre, we're willing to support you from the north. But nothing by that. We won't now send a Radwan force of 10,000 guys, special forces from Lebanon, in order to invade and to conquer the Upper Galilee, as Israel was concerned so much and therefore evacuated 60,000 people. But there was another thing that I think changed the way that Iran saw here this war and thought whether to get involved, turn it to an all-scale war or not. And that's America. America made a decision on that Saturday to take an active part of that war. And when Israel was shaken, I think that before we understood it, America realized that it might lead to a regional war of Iran. And here Biden ordered the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier to turn their direction and get to the Mediterranean Sea. And the order came 6 p.m. on that Saturday of October 7, 11 and a half hours after the attack began. And when he gave that speech saying don't, he also created military credibility. And then after we saw the Eisenhower, and then we saw the Ohio nuclear submarine, and then we started to see B-52s getting into the area, and B-51 and B-1 doing different patrols. And it was very clear to the Iranians that we have in here something different. And now, once we are more than 4 months after the war, there were 210 different Iranian militias attacks in Iraq and in Syria against American forces. 146 Americans got injured, 3 of them got killed. That was the attack over Tanf, one of the bases there by the Jordanian-Syrian border. And here America decided to remove the glove and to attack more. And I think that attack was very efficient. America attacked 84 managed to destroy. They attacked 85 times Iranian militias targets in Syria and in Iraq, and 36 of them in Yemen of the Houthis. That's definitely something that's significant. That's something that people in the Middle East see as strength. Parallel to that, we're looking into Syria and we see that there are more and more forces moving there. They're moving from Iraq, they're moving from other places. There are many things that we wanted to do before when we saw forces moving to the area turning to a threat on Israel and couldn't. Because of the concern that if we're going to attack Hezbollah activists in Syria, we're going to see respond along this border and along the Lebanese. Escalation. The situation already escalated. And therefore Israel decided to be much more active in Syria.